few years ago, you may remember the so-called party to end all parties called FYRE Festival, hosted by a creator, Billy McFarland, and rapper Ja Rule, which was a weekend getaway blowout for elite 20-somethings on a private island in the Bahamas. Tickets range from $400 to $12,750 for VIPs, but the party really failing to deliver on quite a few of the things promised, and McFarland ended up going to prison, and now he's trying it again with FYRE Fest 2. So can it work after quite the epic failure the first go-round? And what does it say for entrepreneurs as they try and kind of reinvent themselves? Pleasure to be joined right now by Colin Campbell, who's a serial entrepreneur and author of the book Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat. Colin, pleasure to have you with us today. Thanks for a few moments.
Happy to be on.
All right, so this is interesting, and I guess I in the world of entrepreneurship, I think I'm never surprised where an entrepreneur will go and try and find an idea that they believe can be successful. I think it's interesting here that something fails, and then you're coming back and trying to do it again a few years later, and with some of the dynamics at play.
Well, I don't know if it was just a failure. I mean, this was an epic failure, a public failure. I mean, this was a situation where someone wasn't even able to provide food, water, housing, even sanitation. And what's fascinating about the story, and we're just going back, I know we're going to talk about how we can fix this going forward, or how Billy McFarland or what he should do to fix this, but just going back and looking at that situation and understanding what happened, I find it absolutely fascinating that the day before the event, he truly believed he was going to pull it off. I sometimes have a saying called entrepreneurs have the disease of optimism.
Right.
And I have been subject to that as well myself. But we think about people like Elon Musk who talk about self-driving by 2020, or Elizabeth Holmes, with what she was trying to accomplish with Theranos. And so there's sometimes a fine line between optimism and actually execution, especially when you're dealing with very serious situations, or you're dealing with people's health, and you're on a clock. Clearly, he was on a clock.
Yeah.
Anyone looking at that situation, a month, 2 weeks beforehand, a day beforehand would have said, let's close this thing down and restart this thing and try to, dust ourselves off, pick ourselves up, and go forward. But he was living in that, we'll call it a reality distortion field. Have you heard that one before?
or versions thereof, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And in his case, it wasn't ready, aim, fire. It was fire, aim, and never ready.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at specifically what went wrong there, he was a great promoter, and he still is a great promoter. And this is, hopefully, you'll get a chance to listen to this or maybe read the book. But the fact of the matter is, every business or startup, in order for it to succeed, needs a good story, a great story. It needs the people, and it needs the systems, and it needs the money.
Yeah.
Now, he had the people if it came to promoting, but he did not have the right operators around him.
Yeah.
He did not have the right systems in place. In order for him to succeed with FYRE 2.0, the first thing he's going to have to do is, and I'm not talking about the legal side here, okay? I'm going to talk about the actual startup side. I'm not going to go down that path. But what I will say is he needs to own up to what went wrong.
Right.
He needs to truly understand that, truly identify what he's good at and what his weaknesses are, and then fill in the gaps. Obviously, he's not an operator. He does not have the experience to pull off events like this. I believe everybody deserves a second chance, and I'm very hopeful that he'll be able to pull this off. And if he owns it, he owns his mistakes, he understands that, and he can figure out what it's going to take to make this successful. I have no doubt that he'll be able to start, scale, exit, and repeat these types of conferences over and over again.
So let me touch on something from your book and really just from the title itself. When you look at the process that a lot of entrepreneurs go through, I think at times one of the important components is the exit part. of knowing when to kind of, pass the reins off to somebody else to run it so that you can go on and kind of take on that next challenge.
Absolutely. And, it's sometimes it's a balance. I've seen entrepreneurs who try to hand off their company to these sort of corporate CEOs, and then everything implodes. I also see entrepreneurs who don't let go. Entrepreneurs are sometimes their worst enemy is themselves. They sometimes cannot scale beyond their own personality. And that's what holds back most companies in America from scaling beyond a small business.
Right.
The vast majority of businesses in America are small business. We're talking 99%. But why is it that so few can actually scale? And I contend that the number one reason is they just can't get beyond themselves. They're their own worst enemy.
Do you think that if he is successful with FYRE 2.0, that part of this is also just kind of the nature of entrepreneurship, where you're going to have fails along the way, but the fails can lead to successes, and to a degree, even something like what happened with the original, there do tend to be, in some cases, short memories.
I understand, and I often say that startup failures are the scars of the past that guide us through our next ventures.
Right.
And let me be clear here. He had 4 years in prison, 7 months in solitary confinement. There's some pretty significant scars there. So I have no doubt that he has learned from his lessons. And I'm optimistic here. I believe he's going to knock it out of the park. He sounds like a very great. He sounds like a great promoter. He sounds like I believe he's actually a great entrepreneur. If he can figure out how to solve those weaknesses, identify what your weaknesses are, and surround yourself with people who can do that. And I don't think Ja Rule was that person. He either needs another partner or he needs to hire the right people to do this. People who have done events like this before. You don't walk into a huge task like putting on an event in 4 months in the Exumas and Bahamas without having the right operational excellence.
I mean, realistically, all you have to do is think about a concert tour to kind of understand how long it takes to put everything together. I mean, you just can't whip it together in a short period of time.
Yeah, you can't, and you're on the clock. You think about other entrepreneurs who've had that reality distortion field, like Steve Jobs. He really did try to achieve the impossible, and sometimes the programmers would pull through. But, and of course he would create the dates, but he always seemed to have more room. When you're dealing with a very specific date and you don't have the experience, let's arguably Steve Jobs did a little better job at managing his distortion field, and he had a little more talent around him. Let's be quite clear here. But the fact is, it was a tough deadline, and I think he's learned from those lessons. I have no doubt this is going to be success. But at this point, I believe he hasn't got a date, he hasn't got a venue, he hasn't got a lineup, and he's got a lot of work to do to build trust with investors and with customers and with the media and everybody who watched that and all those who were victims of his prior event, and you could actually argue it's fraud, obviously. I do think that what he's trying to do here is give money back to the victims of that fraud.
Right.
And so I think that's very noble of him.
Yeah, and that element of trust, it's a challenge when you have the whopper like he had. And you also have to throw in the fact that in the past with the original FYRE, I think he relied, didn't he not, on a lot of social influencers to help promote this as well. And look, popular as they may be, they're not always the ones that are the most reliable in terms of the build out of what you want to try and get.
Absolutely. I mean, let's put it out there. He was brilliant. I mean, he absolutely was brilliant in the way that he pulled it all together, used influencers. Using influencers, we do that often in our business, in our incubator here, and we use them all the time. They can be very effective. I believe that he believed at the time this was going to be what he was demonstrating to others. And I know that's maybe a little bit controversial.
Right.
The fact is, he just didn't have the operational excellence. He didn't have the people around him. He'd never done an event before. He had the disease of optimism, and that caught up with him and went too far.
So that really focuses for you with the book about that element of operation and thinking about, as an entrepreneur, thinking about all the little things that you really, it is a case of dotting the I's and crossing the T's on so many different components, no matter what the idea, no matter what the startup is, correct?
Yeah, correct. So, you need 4 elements to succeed in any startup. And I actually believe for scaling as well. You need to have a great story. You need to have great people. You need to have the money to run it and get it started to a certain level. And you need to have systems. More often than not, we see models where they just don't have enough money to get their idea out the door, especially in today's environment. I mean, it's been very challenging for startups over the last 8 months, 12 months, given the current environment, unless you're in AI. Obviously, that's a different story, but for the most part, it's been challenging. If you don't have one of those 4 components, then you're not going to struggle. You're going to fail. You have to lock in all 4, and you have to think about that on day one. The very first day you put that business plan together. And had Billy McFarland thought about the people he needed to really execute on this and the systems he needed to put in place, I have no doubt we wouldn't be having this interview today.
All right. Colin, great to talk to you. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you very much.
You got it. Colin Campbell, serial entrepreneur and also author of the book Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat. We will take a break. When we come back, we talk Fed and what was said by Chair Powell out in